Welcome to Love the Way You Live with Charlie Lewis, where we connect you with people who live a purposeful and fulfilling life, from travel to food to wellness, and much more. Today, we have you covered by Dr. Karinn Glover is joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here.
All right, we're glad to have you. So everybody out there in the podcast and video world, Dr. Glover is originally from the Bronx. She went to Howard University. Mm-hmm. And then from Howard University, you went to SUNY at downstate.
That's right.
So you are now one of the top Black psychiatrists. How did this all come about?
So it goes back a long way.
Okay.
And so I'll give you the short story.
All right.
So my parents are from Harlem. They are the children of farmers from South Carolina.
All right. Georgia. The Southern Connect. I love it.
You know our people, right?
Yeah.
So my grandparents had a third grade education. They were tired of state-sponsored terrorism in the South.
Yeah.
So they came up north during the Great Migration in the 40s.
Okay.
And what my mom and dad experienced in seeing how the Harlem community suffered through waves of drugs and violence, we were kind of raised with an eye toward, me and my two brothers,
Okay.
we were raised to kind of look at what was happening to our community in current times and with an eye towards what we could do to change things.
Okay.
So I always knew my life was about just helping people who were underserved and who were on the short end of the stick.
Did you know that when you went to Howard that you wanted to be a psychiatrist?
No.
Okay.
I thought about it and I knew I wanted to be a doctor at some point, but I was scared.
Okay. So
What? Because, I feel like some people are really sciencey, and I like science,
Right.
but I didn't feel like I was a star.
Okay.
And so I knew I would have to work really hard. So I thought, okay, maybe if I just focus on the things that give me really good grades, writing, languages. So I was a history major at Howard, Spanish minor, and lived abroad and worked on my language skills and came back and I was like, yeah, darn it, that urge is still inside me.
Okay.
So after I graduated, I worked at Essence Magazine. I worked at Verizon in the marketing and sales. I was an account executive, and the urge just did not go away. That whole time, I just kept on doing activities around mental health and wellness.
Okay.
Panel discussions, all the time, volunteering at Planned Parenthood to talk with new moms about mental health and wellness. And
now, how did you do this before you had a degree in mental health?
I called on experts to come be on the panel.
Okay.
So I would just run the panel discussion and then hand the mic to the people who knew more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you, once you graduated from Howard, to start your career, your school?
About 4 years.
Okay.
So I took my pre-med class. First I tried to do them at night, and that was exhausting.
Okay.
And then I devoted a year to taking those classes and taking the MCAT and applying and all that stuff and doing some research and really confirming for myself that medicine was the right place for me.
Right, okay. So you are a psychiatrist.
I am.
Different from a psychologist. So why don't we tell the audience the difference between psychiatry and from psychiatry?
So there's lots of people who can do mental health. Everybody does it in a different way. So there's licensed mental health counselors. There's folks who are licensed marriage and family therapists. So they usually get a master's degree in counseling or marriage and family therapy. So then there's social workers who get a master's in social work, and then they spend about 3,000 hours doing psychotherapy and being supervised for that. So social workers with an LMSW or LCSW are fine to do psychotherapy. If they've got those hours and they've taken all the major licensing and tests and things like that, great.
Okay.
There's psychologists. They spend about 7 years, anywhere between 4 and 7 years, getting a doctor of philosophy in psychotherapy, in psychology. Or there's folks who do a PsyD, Doctor of Psychology, and that is also years worth of learning how to do psychotherapy. And then there's somebody like me who decides, I'm fascinated by the interaction of the mind and the body.
Okay.
So I went to medical school because I want to know how to treat pregnant people with
Wow.
medication, right? People with schizophrenia have heart attacks too.
Right.
So I need to make sure that the medications that the heart doctors are giving
Okay.
are going to work with the medications that are going to keep my patient from becoming psychotic.
Okay.
So there's a wealth of information that I learned that.
So it's more body, psychiatry is more body, mind, and soul.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, when you think about wellness and fitness, so you're just not working on the mind and just trying to say, okay, this relationship, the reason why you're in this relationship or why this relationship isn't working is because of X. You're saying if I have to treat you and you are pregnant, then I need to make sure I know how to give you the proper medication in addition to
Yes.
treating you.
For you and your baby, and for when you're breastfeeding. And so I have to think about your baby's development, what stage you are in your pregnancy, what's going to go through the placenta to your. Those are all the things that I, as a doctor, as a physician, am trained to consider. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know, we all know life is about relationships. And I always look at life as being, I call it the hand. You know, you have your relationship with God, your relationship with your friends, your relationships with your significant other, your relationship with family members.
Yes.
And then just you yourself trying to overcome any type of relationship that might be, like I said, with your partner. As we get older, how do you decide when it's time, not to make certain relationships a priority in your life?
It's huge. So as we get older, right, we usually get busier. Our jobs are more intense, especially in our 30s and 40s and 50s. That's when we're really finding a groove with our career.
Okay.
And so it's about harnessing and making the most of our expertise at work. But that takes energy, right?
Yeah.
It takes 10 years to even begin to master anything.
Right.
So you put your time in. Well, in the process, that means you grow. And sometimes you grow in a different way and maybe away from the people who were at your foundation.
Right.
And so sometimes that gives us a little bit of strife. That gives us some internal stress because leaving relationships and figuring out, it's sort of a pruning process.
Right.
Who gets to stay? And so I think three things that are the most important to consider are, does this person enhance my well-being? Is this person adding to my life? What are they like when I'm going through stress? Do they know me? Can they help me through difficult times?
Right.
And then when they're stressed out, are they stressing me out and leaving me unable to function? Are they making me lay out flat in my bed after I get off the phone with them?
Okay.
And so those are the things that are important to consider. And then how much do you need to be committed to them if they're related to you and you're going to see them often? And how toxic are they?
Okay.
All things I consider.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of toxicity out here. How do we make ourselves a priority, in a relationship? Because I think a lot of things, we always want to please others. We're pleasing our family members, we're pleasing the other one, we want to be loved. Everybody wants love. Hey, love the way you live. We're all striving to get to that point where you live your authentic self. So how do you yourself make yourself a priority?
So I try to...
And to be mentally fit. And,
Look, I keep a therapist because what I'm not going to do is go to work and listen to everybody's problems all day, including the staff, right?
Right.
Because I'm not going to do that all day and then come home and have no space to work through some of the things that I've experienced during the day. There's such a thing as secondary trauma.
Okay.
That as you are being helpful to people who have been through a lot, that takes a toll on you.
Yeah.
So I keep a therapist. Number two, I look at my week ahead and I try to build into my week space for me to connect with myself.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
Good idea.
And I think hard about what are the things that I know are going to stress me out. If I know that I've got to I have an early meeting, my job is good for having an 8 o'clock meeting at some far-flung destination. And so how am I going to make sure that I get to the meeting feeling rested and feeling ready for what's about to happen? So planning, I think, is part of it. Yeah.
Okay. I want to shift the conversation and really speak in, terms of Black men and how we are seen in society. Because I think, Black men are often portrayed in the media as a loveless, and I hate to use that term, but group, incarceration is high. Many of us might not have the education. We fall out of school, drugs have always been the case in our community. But how do we regain our identity of our caring and nurturing and loving self, that who we truly are as a group of people are to society? How do we go there? How do we get back there?
So that's a beautiful, heartbreaking question, right? Because there's so many things that we are kind of conditioned to just kind of overcome and almost ignore, right? And so I think understanding your own traumas, this is what I'm getting at when I say things we're conditioned to sort of overcome, ignore, is getting in touch with your own trauma, because like it or not, when somebody has been in a situation where they felt like their life was at risk or that their safety was at risk and they felt like they had no control, chances are that experience gets embedded in our memory.
Right.
Our body remembers it even when our mind has tried to forget it.
Okay.
And so when it comes to finding your way back to love, it really comes through accepting what happened in some kind of way and then loving yourself through the process of remembering so that you can reframe what happened and look at yourself from a position of strength and not powerlessness.
Wow.
So there's a wonderful writer named Junot Diaz who's Afro-Latino. He wrote a beautiful essay about his own experience with sexual trauma. And when he decided to be open about it and talk about his own experience in therapy, it was really powerful, heartbreaking, but also powerful, because this man is still living and still moving ahead.
Wow. So what do you think do we even understand what we're going through? I think that's some of the questions. We're out here working every day. We got society, all the stresses of society, the job and trying to keep up and trying to raise a family and everything like that. Do we know that we're even under, such weight and such pressures?
Right. I think most of the time we find out about what we're going through or what's happened to us is when we're in an intimate relationship with somebody else. And it's how we love. Right? So there's how we live. There's the photos people see on Instagram, there's the hair flip, right? But when it comes to your intimate relationships, that's when somebody can really read you and say, I can tell you've been hurt.
Yes.
And you're carrying that hurt with you and it's affecting how you and I interact. So that's one thing. I think also to understand that Black people have been through centuries of racial trauma. And so there's that change that happens in our DNA as a result of the trauma. And then there's also what we pass down in so far as attitudes and behaviors to each other. Okay. So if you're Black, chances are you've inherited some trauma. Right. And then if you've been through any kind of situation where you had to worry about your life, your safety, the food availability, whether somebody in your household was addicted to substances or was incarcerated, whether you were incarcerated, chances are you've been through some things and it's probably worth it to talk with somebody. Right.
Yeah. And I think, just listening to that list, it's so overwhelming because you don't even realize that those things are vices that are holding you back.
Absolutely.
And not helping you progress and get along. So I think you made one good question is it's when we get in relationships, you bring that baggage into that relationship. What do you suggest to women, since you are a woman, I'm taking a woman's perspective, if you see someone who's hurting, how do you get them the help that they need in order to love you the way you need to be loved? Because you, as a Black woman, you're hurting as well. But you can identify it, I think, quicker than Black men can. So what do you suggest there? How would you guide your people?
So getting men to the doctor is hard, as it is. Getting men to a therapist
is even harder.
You might as well start training for the long jump or the javelin throw because it's hard.
Yeah.
So one way I try to do it is to try to connect people with a primary care doctor who can do some of the screening around mental health. So some of the primary care doctors are working with social workers in what we call integrated care.
Okay.
That social worker is a therapist. And so when you go for your flu shot, you go to get your blood pressure checked, you'll get 2 questions that say, how are you doing? Are you feeling hopeless? Is life worth living for you? And are you losing interest in the things that you love? Right. And so those questions like that really stimulate discussion, and that is a flag for the primary care doctor to say, look, I know that how you're doing emotionally is connected to how your body is doing,
yeah,
right?
health.
Because we know that people with a history of trauma as children or adverse childhood events, like the ones I described earlier, they're at higher risk for diabetes, higher risk for morbid obesity, higher risk for high blood pressure, terrible outcomes, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so sometimes primary care is the key to getting somebody to the help they need. If your doctor says, look, in order to get your weight down, in order to get your blood pressure down, I need for you to spend 10 sessions talking with somebody and figuring out how to move your life forward, because I can tell you're stuck.
Right. And I see most, some of my friends and guys my age, they might be overweight. You see the you see the obesity, you see the health. We got a lot of people dying of cancer. Obesity is really, running, and you can see people running from some of that trauma, like you dictated, which causes a problem when they get in their 40s and 50s when it comes down to marriage. So how do you even guide, because what I'm seeing now in a lot of relationships, a lot of my friends are getting divorced. And so it's because of issues that people haven't really dealt with.
Yeah.
So how do we get, before we can get to that level of, how do we get people to actually talk though? I mean, what do you advise?
One of the things that I think is crucial is if you're having difficulty in multiple domains of your life, if your marriage is on the rocks, if your job is asking you questions about how you're doing, right? Or if your kids are acting out.
Right.
Look, the common denominator is you, right? You need to take a look at yourself and know that as human beings, right, we're not perfect and that we all have work to do on ourselves. I mean, thank God we're not done with ourselves,
it's true.
Right? Because that might be the day you end up not waking up, right? So look, this is part of being alive. So one of the things that the Buddhists say that I always draw inspiration from is, as long as you have a body, it's going to give you trouble, right? And so pay attention to what your body is telling you. And then from there, pay attention to your pain. Pay attention to what your partner is telling you. Right. Even if your partner has their own imperfections, which naturally they do, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to take a look at yourself and find a way that's healthy to start looking at yourself without being overwhelmed with guilt and shame.
Okay, all right. Well, I love that discussion. Stay tuned for part 2 with Dr. Karinn Glover.